All right, welcome everyone. And normally Peter Lillydahl would be kicking us off this afternoon, but he got a last minute appointment for the joys of a root canal. So we wish him well, and he'll hopefully be able to join us at the end, even though he might not be able to speak very well. Although that would be kind of fun to hear, having Peter in a place where he wants to talk and maybe isn't able to. My name is Mark Garneau, and I am a member of the BCMT Executive. I work as a numeracy helping teacher out of Surrey, and I know I've come across many of your paths before. And if you were part of this ongoing assessment series, I did this session last time. But I'm just going to get us rolling here. We have a new format as the BCMT is kind of taking over a little bit and kind of continuing these conversations which have begun since Peter's session back in October and the group that emerged out of it. I'd like to start by acknowledging or taking the opportunity to acknowledge the shared Torah to the people on whom our schools and homes are located, and recognizing the First Nations who have signed the Aboriginal Education Enhancement Agreement. Our shape of the day today, we're going to actually start off. Last time we talked about some things to maybe try out and that we'd really like to kick off each of these new sessions, and we have 3 scheduled for this year, for the balance of this school year, and we hope to pick it up again in the fall. And we're encouraging people to share, and so anywhere from 10 to 15 minutes or so, we give it an open floor of people to share what they've been trying. Then we have a guest speaker today, Elysia Dubland from Surrey, who will be talking about tiered practice quizzes, and I'm very excited that Elysia is here today to be able to share her ideas. I'll introduce her more properly when it comes to that time. After Alicia's presentation, we're actually going to do a bit of a breakout time, probably just about 10 minutes or so, just for people to get the opportunity in small groups to discuss some of the ideas that they heard from Elysia. And then coming out of that, there'll hopefully be something to take away and try out, whether it be specifically about what Elysia talked about or maybe something else related to assessment, so that next time when we meet again, we'll have hopefully some people willing to share what they've been trying out and how that's been going. After that time, by that time it'll be around 4:30 or so, and so people are welcome to stick around if there are any sort of general questions and answers. Some of the people who have presented earlier in this series are here with us this evening, and there's lots of other people who have been trying things and are around here. So there'll be some open general questions and answers for any of those who are interested after that. So to get going on our first part, where we wanted to share what we've been trying, I wanted to come back to what I left with at the end of the last session. And it's okay if you weren't at the last session or any of the earlier sessions. These are just ongoing conversations. They might hit different things at different times. And so really, don't worry if you haven't been a part of that. But this is just kind of to bridge what came before. So I talked about, just try something, but be intentional about it. Be intentional about what you're hoping to try out. Ideally, get somebody to collaborate. There's going to be that sort of cycle of reflection. Try something out. How did that go? Maybe make some changes. And ultimately, because this is around assessment, what are you learning about your students through this process? So I gave a bunch of ideas that emerged out of my workshop last time, that maybe you tried something here, or there's something that connects to you on something that you have been doing and you'd be willing to talk about it. So it could be around just the very idea of using learning standards instead of just using test scores and things like that. What happens when we structure our grades books around learning standards? The use of mathematical routines as an assessment tool, taking ordinary questions and drawing out competencies by the kinds of prompts that you ask, unit level competency prompts that get at the key understandings for that unit. What does proficiency look like for an upcoming topic that you were going to be teaching? taking what you're currently using for assessment, but reorganizing it with these ideas in mind of looking for proficiency levels and how how you might structure your existing assessments accordingly. And then there's anything as well for those who have been to earlier sessions. Phil talked about standards-based grading and assessment. Mike talked a lot. Mike Pruner, that was Phil Stringer. Mike Pruner talked a lot about assessment of competencies, and Rob looked at using exemplars and anchor tasks to create rubrics for assessment. Or it could be anything else. So that's enough of me for now. It is an open floor for anyone to share. It could be something that went well for you. It could be something that maybe did not go well for you. It could be something that you're trying to do or that you intend to do and maybe haven't done yet. But just an open floor. You can either type in the chat or you can unmute yourself and speak to the group. But we'd love to at least spend a few minutes here hearing from some people.
Hey, Mark, I can share something.
Awesome, Sue, go ahead.
Okay, so one of the things that I've been working on is using observations in my assessment practice. And the hard part that I'm finding is remembering to sit down and write down my observations. And so I was really intentional about it last week. And at the end of the week, the students have been working in groups. And on Saturday morning, I just sat down and tried to kind of go through what I remembered from that group work in terms of the observations that I made. And so I sat down and just wrote about each, as much as I could remember about each student, and made notes of like students who weren't participating or who were away. What I need to do next is sort of sit down and look at using some assessment of proficiency scales to kind of just keep track of where each student was at with that particular. So I was sort of like using learning standards, and we were looking at, I can't remember what we were looking at. But now I need to go back and make notes like, it was a calculus class and we were working on some curve analysis stuff using first and second derivative tests. So I was looking to see whether the kids had an understanding of what the first derivative test meant and what they were looking for, and where they were at with being able to find derivatives and just simplify equations. And so I've got lots of notes now, and now I need to go back and code it, just to remember where each student was at with particular things.
All right, thank you, Sue, for that. And yeah, there's a lot of in this process of trying to do that kind of thing. You know, you set up the intention, then you try it out, and then you try to make some things practical. You get ideas about how to be descriptive across those proficiency levels, and then that helps you become a better observer in the end. And being an observer helps you become a better designer of what those standards can look like across levels. So it's an ongoing growing process, but it sounds exciting, and I certainly look forward to seeing how that all plays out, because yeah, observational assessment is very powerful, and yet there's probably not a whole lot of it, even though teachers, I think, do a lot of that naturally. It just happens and it feeds your intuition, but it doesn't necessarily feed our actual recording of evidence of what we're learning about our students. So that's really cool. So I see in our chat, Richard talked about slow reveal graphs and how much that worked. I love those things. Richard, you're free to come in and talk a little bit more about that if you want, no pressure. But that's if you're not familiar with slow reveal graphs, you could Google that and look that up. It's really, really cool, especially also now as attention to data is becoming really a more prominent part of being numerate these days, because we're presented with so much information in that way in the media and so on, and the implications for that are so huge. So that is certainly an important goal. Um, yeah, so many
Yeah,
competing needs. I completely understand how it is with these things, and how challenging it is with everything else going on, to try something new. A lot of us have been, a lot of you have been adapting so much already, just trying to work within the existing conditions and the changing landscape as things go along. So the best advice is always just keep it simple, and most of all, keep yourself well, and put yourself first. And if you want to try something, great, but just try something, simple. Try one little thing, if anything, because you all have a lot to deal with right now. Okay, would anybody else like to say anything?
Mark, I could just mention something about the slow reveal graphs if you'd like.
Absolutely.
It was super interesting because the one we chose had an increasing slope. So, and we did a couple of them, and it didn't matter which one we used. It was always COVID related as their guess. So it was really told a lot about what kids had on their minds when they were doing it. So it gave us a really good chance to actually focus on some of the competencies and have them actually make some inferences about what was involved. So I found it worked really well for math and science. It was a nice crossover. So I'm not sure if it was more of a math lesson or more of a science lesson. And luckily I get to do both. So it worked out really, really great. So I wanted to thank you for introducing me to those. I don't think I'd seen them before.
Oh, that's cool. That's cool. It actually makes me think of an interesting task would be, show any graph. Just draw a graph and say, all right, what's the COVID story that could be behind this graph? That would be interesting to try
I
that
think
out. Okay, any other thoughts, experiences, challenges that anybody would like to share before we transition to Elysia? I'll practice a little bit of wait time here. I'm just seeing the question in any samples of those graphs. Yeah, for Richard, if there's anything you could share specifically with what you did, that'd be great. I'll share the website in the chat, at least the one of the first one I'd go to learn more about this and how they work.
Mark.
Yes.
Hi. It's Preet.
Hi.
Hi. I was just thinking that this year is so awful in terms of, COVID. I try to do tasks, whether it's estimation 180 or a numeracy task or a slow reveal graph. And the awesome thing is the kids get so excited. But the sad thing is that because they get excited, they get so animated, and then there's movement and there's airflow, and then I get freaked out. And so then I try to calm it down, and I think I'm doing a disservice.
Okay, I hear you. The sort of the well, social and health-wise implications of mathematical engagement and excitement. And I don't know, I because I'm not directly in the classrooms, I'm supporting teachers from outside the classrooms. I'd love to hear from anybody else if they have some ideas about that. I know there's a lot of people using thinking classrooms and vertical surfaces and so on, and just managing those safety concerns with wanting kids to be together and be close to each other and listening to each other's ideas and getting excited about that. Okay, well, Preet, that question's out there. It's going to keep staying out there. I think it's an important question to raise, and so I we can maybe bring it up again later as maybe some more people will join, or an ongoing thing. It is certainly something worth thinking about. And have, kind of how do we manage that? Maybe it's just, adjusting our own expectations around those situations and so on. I think looking at the time, it's been a good length of time, so we can now head into our next session, our next part of the session. I see a couple of people have shared the links about slow reveal graphs, so thank you for that. Oop, that's not what I want. I want to go back to here to our shape of the day. There we go. So we've done the open time. Next, we're going to have Elysia Dubland. And Elysia, so for those who aren't aware, in the Surrey School District, we've been having several teachers kind of really shifting their assessment practices towards a standards-based idea. And last year in particular, we had a really big focus with about 18 different schools involved and close to 40 teachers, and really, trying a lot of these ideas out. Elysia has been doing this for a number of years now and has been largely invested in really trying to shift her practice. And I've learned a lot from her, and she's been a very active in her professional learning around this and going to other people's classrooms and learning. So I'm very excited to give Elysia the opportunity here to speak to a larger group. So without any further ado to that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And Elysia, I'm going to try to see if I make you co-host. I think that gives you screen sharing privileges.
Okay.
Do you have screen sharing privileges now?
Let's see. Yeah, it looks like it.
Okay, it's over to you.
Okay, great, thank you. So I'm not sure, my camera is doing weird things, and I'm not sure how to fix it, so I'm probably just gonna look a little strange, but anyway, thank you. I was really honored to ask to present at this, and I've got some tough acts to follow, but yeah, so I'll see if I can get my screen shared and we'll get right into it. So here we go. Okay, so I'm going to be sharing something called tiered practice quizzes, just an assessment tool I've started using. Before I sort of show how it works, some examples, just wanted to share a little bit of my journey of how I got to this point. So I'd like to start off by just talking about a hypothetical student named Billy. And Billy is in his fractions unit, and he's got halfway through, and this is what the teacher has assessed Billy's understanding to be, or his skills. So Billy can multiply proper fractions, but not mixed fractions. He also forgets to reduce sometimes. He does not use cross-canceling, which makes working with larger numbers difficult. He can add and subtract fractions with common denominators, but he still struggles with different denominators. So the teacher understands where Billy's at. This is Billy's assessment of Billy's current understanding of fractions. I suck at fractions. So self-assessment is important because we want, as you know, we want students to have an idea, to know more than, okay, I suck at fractions. Well, that's pretty general. Here's a plug for Peter's book. If you haven't read it, I'm sure many people here have, but I read it over spring break, fantastic. Liked this quote. So students trying to navigate their own learning, they need to know where they are and where they're going. In the context of a thinking classroom or any classroom, where they are is what they understand, know, and are able to do. And where they're going within the scope of a study is what they have not yet learned, don't understand, and or are not yet able to do. I just realized I didn't check whether you guys can see my screen. Can somebody just confirm to me that you can see the PowerPoint I am sharing?
Yes, we can. You do have
Perfect.
We
Yep.
do have it set up so that we see your main screen and the next slide, but if you need that for your
Oh,
own,
yeah.
that's okay.
Yep. Whoops. That's okay. You'll get a
Yeah,
little
it's
preview.
fine. We can still see the main
The
slide.
main one. Okay. Okay. I wonder if I could change that. Nah, I don't think it's worth it. Okay, so like students need to know the specific skills that they're able to do, and then what they still need to do in order to make some progress. Whoops. Okay. So come on. There we go. So the more specific, the better. So if we could take Billy from I suck at fractions to I'm good at multiplying and dividing fractions, but I can't add or subtract them. That's a little better, okay? He's a little more specific, but maybe it should be even more specific. I can multiply proper fractions, but not mixed fractions. Now he knows, okay, I can just focus on mixed fractions. And I can only add or subtract fractions with common denominators. And then if we could get Billy to, the detail that the teacher understands, that'd be awesome, but who knows? I do think the third one is pretty good. So now a little shameless plug for my thesis, just kidding. But this is where I really started kind of exploring some of this stuff and was very lucky to get to work with Peter. And so it was all about looking at homework and how could we turn homework into something meaningful that students would use as self-assessment to know exactly where they are and where they're going. So this is a picture of the homework tracking sheets that I used, and they look quite similar to the instruments that Peter presents in his book because he helped me put them together. So the learning outcomes are down the left-hand side. This is for grade 10 exponents. And then there's columns for the dates, whereas Peter's, there's columns for emerging, developing, or whatever levels. And so I had students, they would write in the question numbers that they did. So the homework, they would write it in, the questions, and for the proper row for the learning outcome. And they would do that every day. And so then once they'd written the questions in, they would track how they engaged with it. So if they didn't do it, they would write an O for each question. If they got it wrong, they would put an X. This column is actually for a quiz. If they did it with help, they put an H. And then if they did a check mark, means they got it right on their own. And so the idea here, as with Peter's instruments, is that this can allow for some self-assessment based on data, not a student's opinion. So the student hopefully will look at this and think, okay, oh, well, that makes sense. I didn't do those questions. I got them wrong on the practice quiz the next day. Or, oh, for this learning outcome, okay, I got help with all those questions. So I got help with identifying integers, et cetera, et cetera. I should try some of those by myself. So the idea that they can identify which learning outcomes or what exactly they know how to do, or they got help with, or they're getting wrong. And Peter has added a couple of symbols I really like. I think he's got S for silly mistake, which I really like, and maybe G as well if it was done in a group. So there were some issues with this system that I found throughout the research. Is many students didn't bother to fill these out. They weren't for marks, of course. And yeah, and some students only did them because I told them to. The students didn't actually value them. So then they didn't bother to, they didn't value the information that the sheets gave them. And so they didn't see how it could help them. There was also some students, as always, that were completely unmotivated to learn. So there was no way they would be doing any of this. But that's another topic, and I'm not going to address that topic today. But the system was still valuable. So for those students that used it properly, so that bought in, that were using the sheets, it absolutely helped them so much. I even had students who weren't using them at the beginning, and somehow they decided to buy in and saw vast improvements in their progress. So then I started wondering, can I find some other kind of assessment tools that could be completed in class, so hopefully more students would do them, and would have a higher buy-in. So I started thinking of different ideas, and I did start doing during the research daily quizzes that were also tracked on the sheets, so that at least the students were in class forced to do those questions, and they could track how they did on those quizzes compared to homework. And it worked, those worked fairly well, but still students weren't valuing the sheets as much as I wanted. Then I started thinking about review, and review is interesting to me because there's this motivation, it's imminent. And so, students always, the rush, like 1 or 2 days before the test, all of a sudden students are rushing to try and get ready. So one thing I wanted to do was allow students to have smart, flexible review. And so I would tell students only do the questions that you need to do. So I'd give them a list, and often they would be, with learning outcomes attached. And I was thinking, okay, the students will look at their tracking sheets, or sometimes I didn't use the tracking sheets. I was hoping students would just know, but the problem is they didn't know. Students still didn't know which questions they needed to do from a review assignment, or they didn't listen to me and they just still started at question 1 and were going through all of it. So some students also didn't do any of it. So I needed something else, or I wanted something else. So I started thinking, I've heard from different teachers ideas of different colors or highlighters on quizzes or tests, and I like that. That's very visible. So I started thinking, how can I use that? I decided I'm going to force students through some different levels of completing questions or completing a quiz in class. So the first level, they'll do everything they can on the quiz by themselves and in a particular color pencil. And then they need to switch colors, and they're allowed to open the notes or the textbook and use those to help them. And all that work they do in a new color. And then they can work with a group. So the next stage, they can ask anybody for help, new color, and finally asking myself questions and also looking at a key. So I was hoping that these colors would clearly show students what they were good at and what they needed to work on, hopefully. So I'll show you a couple of versions just because I think it shows how I kind of wrestled with this, made mistakes, tried it, and got it a bit better. So my first version I did with my pre-calc 12s, and I'll just open that up real quick. So can you guys see my Word document? I'm hoping.
Yeah, it's there.
Yep, perfect. Okay. Always worried that. So yeah, so just instruction beginning, asking them to make a scale. And so then they're going through these questions in those 4 phases. And then at the end, I had them write a note to me. Miss Dubland, I'm doing well with blah, blah, blah. Miss Dubland, I'm struggling with, and a specific plan for improving. And then I'd have them hand it in so I could look through it, see if there was any sort of pattern with what the class was struggling. Because I always have the students do this a couple of days before the test's going to happen, so that I have the opportunity to, address some things the next day, and they have an opportunity to study off of this and actually do something about it. So I learned a couple of things from this version, is that a lot of the students need the learning outcomes to accurately assess. I didn't have them because I hadn't yet put together standards-based grading for my pre-calc 12. Some didn't. Some pre-calc 12s, like, they knew exactly what they needed to work on, but many needed learning outcomes. I also learned give the key at the end. They will look at it way too quick. A lot of students were skipping the notes part. I don't know if they don't value their notes or they'd rather talk to friends, but they would skip that. They'd also ask a friend a quick question and not switch colors. So they'd be doing individual work, ask their buddy a question. Oh yeah, that's how I do it. And then keep going, not recognizing that they'd gotten help. A second version, I'll show you that one real quick, is a little bit better. So it's for my grade 9s. irrational numbers, same instructions, but now there's learning outcomes. So the learning outcomes questions are divided by learning outcomes. So again, they're going through, they're doing their questions in the 4 different colors, and still same note at the end. But I've added list the learning outcomes here that you're struggling with. So from this one, I learned a few things. So some students still weren't using the learning outcomes. I don't know if I hadn't talked about them enough, but anyway, the learning outcomes were too broad. So a student says, I need to work on multiplying fractions, when really they just need to work on multiplying mixed fractions. And so I've worked with learning outcomes with different people. When I worked with Peter and some different people in my thesis, the learning outcomes were very specific. So you'd have 8, 9, or 10 learning outcomes. And so the student would have very specific feedback. But then other people I work with in the past few years have said, no, better to keep it to 4 or 5 learning outcomes because it's more manageable, it's less for the students to keep track of. So there's different schools of thought. But I knew that at least on this particular piece of assessment, a learning outcome that is multiplying and dividing fractions, I just thought the students would be able to look at the questions and see, I need to work on mixed fractions, but they weren't. And anyway, I'll talk about that a little bit more at the end, how I'm thinking of fixing that. And then the last thing was their plans for improving were extremely unhelpful. They were writing things like study, do more questions, watch YouTube videos, and that was it. Whereas I was thinking they should write things like get help with learning outcome 3-2 or try more on my own for anyway. And then the last version I'll show real quick is here. And so this is a recent one I did with my kids. So now again, by learning outcome, so each page is learning outcome, and they can choose this time the level of questions to complete. They can do them all if they want, if they have time. And then a little box at the bottom for what they're good at and what they need to work on within that learning outcome. So hopefully they're identifying some specifics. And then they can also self-assess here. Now, I'm not sure if I'm going to keep this because I thought about it and I think that's more opinion. They're trying to rate themselves where that's at. I'm not sure if that's helpful. So then same thing, learning outcomes with the assessment box at the bottom. And then at the very end, I changed this. First of all, I took out the note to me, especially through reading Peter's book. I thought about it. Of course, this is not for me. This is for them. So why should they write a note to me? And just said learning outcomes that I need to work on the most. So they just list the learning outcomes. And then instead of a study plan, having them pick review questions. So before we did this quiz, we went through, I gave them review questions. I had them track which learning outcomes the different review questions matched to. So they had some opportunity, some practice identifying them. So we did that work. And then they had those questions to choose from. So based on the learning outcomes that they need to work on, they choose which questions they're going to do. So, so this was better. Like I said, they chose review questions. And I did actually see many students completing just those review questions, at least a lot more. The learning outcomes were still too broad. Now I'll show a few student samples, just so you can get an idea of what this looks like. So my first sample, this student engaged with the quiz, but not really too much with the self-assessment. So she worked through the quiz. She didn't really fill in the stages. She didn't really do the stages. She's put like very brief notes at the bottom. I'm good at finding coefficients. Okay, I need to work on monomials. Well, what in specific? And so she's kind of just done a half job. She's not really bought into the self-assessment. I need to work on this one. Didn't pick any review questions. I think she just picked a learning outcome to work on. So that's the least level of engagement. I'll show you the next example. This student had good engagement and did the different stages. And in addition, I've been really encouraging them to do this. Has written little notes to herself. So she put the answers in from the key, can just be written 6 for the degree. Some decent feedback to herself. She needs to find the degrees, or she's good at that, but she doesn't know the names of the polynomials yet, etc. So some nice assessment here. Doesn't look like she did too many of the in-between stages. It's mostly just her by herself and the key. And then she has listed, even though she really only needs to work on 4.4, she's listed almost all of the review questions. So I'm wondering if she just thinks she wants to do it all, but I worry that she'll start at the beginning and then not bother getting to the harder questions, which are really what she needs to do. So I need to think about how to encourage students away from this. Perhaps, or maybe she will do them all. I don't know. Some things. And then this student did more of the engagement. You can see more of the colors here. She's done more of the stages, some good feedback to herself. And then unfortunately though, at the end, she seems to not have understood that she was actually supposed to pick review questions. She's just identified a learning outcome that she needs to do, I think. So that's the next thing I'm working on, helping kids understand what they're doing here, they didn't seem to be picking review questions. And then, whoops, last but not least, I don't think there's much more to show with this one. Again, mostly the key and Ms. Dubland. And then here's one that I'd really like to show that is really going towards the level of engagement I'm hoping for. So this student is a very strong student, very thoughtful, and he's gone through, he's very good at math, so there's not too much wrong, but he's checked it at each stage. He went through each stage, he identified specific things.
Sorry, Elysia, your screen's gone down. So we just haven't seen this last example.
Oh, okay. Let me see if I can fix that.
Thank you.
Thanks for telling me. Okay, let's see. Share screen. Okay. Can you see it now?
Yeah, we're good.
Good to go.
Okay. Okay, I will start again. Yeah, so this student is a great example of the kind of engagement I'm hoping for, at least. Very thoughtful. He's gone through and checked his work at each stage. So he worked by himself, he looked at notes, he asked a friend, checked his work with a friend, and then looked at the key at the end. I'm good at identifying coefficients and degrees. I need to work on, because of he got that one wrong, I need to identify the constant term. And this one, he got everything right. And he still said, maybe I need to work on identifying like terms just in case. Same kind of idea here, got everything right. Still wants to check dividing polynomials. So at the bottom, he's then identified, okay, 4.1 and 4.4, because if we look back, those are some learning outcomes where he got some things wrong. And he also did the emerging and developing questions for 4.4. So he's identified, okay, those 2 learning outcomes, I really need to work on the most. I don't really need to work very little at all on the other 2. So then he went through the review questions and specifically chose the questions that he was going to work on. And so, I mean, that's what I'm hoping for. So how I'm thinking of moving forward with this, ideas for improving implementation. The first thing that's always, it baffles me that I tend to forget, oh, right, students need scaffolding. So I'm thinking of getting some laminated exemplars, and the students can work like of a mock student that has filled out this quiz, and students would then work in groups to assess this student's work, to identify what they need to work on for each learning outcome, and to choose review questions for that student. Thinking of directing the students, very like forcing them through the phases. When I originally started, I was just letting students autonomously decide when they were ready to move from the individual to the notes. And that kind of just started blending into, the pre-calc 12s were talking to their friends immediately. Students were skipping stages. So I might just force them through the stages, at least at the beginning. Might have students check each other's quizzes at the end, see if they've identified things that they need to work on, help each other pick review questions. But I also think that I need to help the students to value the self-assessment. That really came out of my research work, was if the students don't value it, no matter how good your system is, it's meaningless. Because they won't do anything with it. So I tried this today, actually. I had the students, they wrote a test today. I had them look at their tiered practice quiz immediately before they wrote the test. And I said, remind yourself what you need to work on. What things do you need to remember to do? I've given them, with my last unit, I gave them some reflection questions comparing their tiered practice quiz and then their test results. So, what did you identify on the quiz? Did you do something to address that? Like, did you do some review questions? Did you ask for help, etc.? Did you make those same mistakes on your test? And why or why not? At least so they have an idea, there's a correlation here, this could help me. And then I am thinking or trying to use the tiered practice quizzes as evidence of the connecting and reflecting, really, of learning from mistakes. I haven't done a whole ton with that yet, so I'll probably just leave that for now, and I think I'm over time. So questions I have about improving implementation is, I'm wondering, like, how do I address this? Because students, I would see a student, their tiered practice quiz, they didn't know how to do mixed fractions, but they knew how to multiply and divide the easier fractions. But they were just writing, I am bad at multiplying fractions. So do I add, they could not differentiate. Do I add like labels within the different learning outcomes, or do I go back to more specific learning outcomes? Maybe that's a matter of opinion. Another thing I'm wondering is 4 tiers too many? So I'm wondering if I should combine the notes and the group or the friend tiers into one tier called help. Perhaps students would be more willing to just work through 3 tiers. Or is the difference important? Like, is there a significant difference between working from notes in a textbook versus talking to a friend? I don't know. If so, I need to help the students value their meaningful notes. And that's pretty much it. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Elysia. And that's a couple of things that I want to pick up on there. One is that what a beautiful model of a reflective practitioner to be able to share with us your journey of what your idea was, how you started, and all the various variables and things that you changed along the way, and that you're still in that journey of growth. So I think that's a really powerful model to us of how this working with any of these assessment ideas, the messiness of it, and how it is a journey. And we can learn from each other, and that's what you're now reaching out to us to get some ideas. And so there will be some time for people to interact with you. But before we do that, we're going to switch into breakout groups and give people maybe about 7 minutes or so to discuss some reflections on Elysia's presentation. It can be so that when we come back, I'm hoping that some people will be willing to share. It could be a reflection. It could be things that Elysia directly asked us about. specifically around, how to wrestle with the learning outcomes being too broad or too narrow. And maybe some advice around there, how do we help students become better informed about, targeting the learning that they need to do. And the other part of that, thank you for displaying the questions, was about the number of tiers. And so she has this idea of, gradual new layers of help, and is 4 tiers too many, or would 3 be enough? So those are a couple of worthwhile things to consider. It looks like we have 29 participants in here, and I want at least 5. So I'm going to make 6 groups. And I will invite you back once we're done. So about 7 minutes, or about 25 after 4, we'll come back. All right, I think we have everybody back now, which is great. It is right now, it's 4:28. By the way, I really appreciate the level of discussion that was going on in the breakout groups. I've tried to drop in and listen on a few of them. That's fantastic, just to hear the level of interest and sharing and so on. So we'd love for the whole group to be able to hear from that as well. I certainly have a couple of thoughts I wouldn't mind sharing, but it is 4:28, and we wanted to formally wrap up by 4:30, but we're not going to end this chat at 4:30. So rather than stop right at 4:30 and interrupt whatever conversation's happening, we're just going to continue, and you're just, free to leave whenever you like. And some of us will stick around as long as needed, up to a maximum of 5 o'clock. We're going to focus the discussion around Elysia's presentation, and then at a certain point we'll transition to any broader sort of question and answer kind of things that people may want to talk about. So the floor is open. Hopefully there's some things that were in your breakout rooms that you'd like to discuss, even if it's just feedback for Elysia. She knows she's asking us, she's putting it on us, what would you do? And so let's hear from you. What advice or ideas or feedback do you have for Elysia?
I hope to be as organized.
Yeah, I'm not that organized. Took a while.
Elysia, I tried some of the stuff that was in some ways like what you're doing, like using learning outcomes.
Yep.
For like marking based on those. And I was telling people in the group that one of the ways I was even keeping track of, which was initially, I was like, how do I keep track of all this stuff? And I made a folder in a filing cabinet. And every few days we'd take stuff out and we'd say, okay, what have we done that meets these learning outcomes that I want to have evaluated? And then they'd get a slip of paper and they'd fill it. This is a learning outcome. And this is what I was, this is what I did well. And this is what I'd like to do better on this. And they'd staple it on and then they'd put it in their folder. So then when I got to a time when I needed to do assessment, then I just went to grab their folder and I could go through all the little slips of paper and write down and comment more on stuff if I wanted to and fill it in. So that helped me just staying organized with all this information that suddenly was more than just numbers from assignments.
Cool. Nice.
Elysia, I really appreciate how you shared your visuals so I could see your quizzes, and I like how you had the headers for the titles for the students as well, because they can really tell what part of the mathematics they are working on. And I agree, I like that you were questioning the piece where whether you need 4 categories or 3 at the top. As an opinion, I think you're moving down to 3 would be okay, where they have it alone, where they work with their notes, but then if they're seeking help, because I don't think you want to encourage them, obviously, to work within their group and to work within their student body. But whether they come to you or they come to a neighbor, I think help is just helping in general if you're looking to simplify it.
Okay. Yeah, thanks. So are you saying, so then include include myself also in the stage with where they're getting help from friends. So, or still have.
It depends. If you're going with the current system you have,
Yeah.
you could just, if you wanted to go down to 3 tiers, you could list it as help, or you could have it as in Peter's book. He has those 6 to 7 different symbols, like H is help, P is the group, X is I got it wrong, but I tried it, the check mark is I got it right. You could move those symbols onto your page as well, but I know you want to color coordinate what kids, that actually does tell them what they did on their own, but you've just taken a different, if you go with your spin though, your spin still works. It depends, it just on what you prefer.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. I'm just thinking of like, I'm thinking from the, like from me trying with them, I found that a few kids, I'm not sure if just 4 is too many. They're just kind of done with switching colors that many times. Like I'm having trouble getting the kids to go through 4. So yeah, maybe I may be thinking like 3 might be more manageable. They might be more willing to do 3 different colors, but yeah. Thanks.
Elysia, I wanted to check. So like when in their colors, when they're doing those check marks, is that like, okay, I've checked this answer with my notes and then I've checked this answer with the peer, like all of the different check marks in different colors? I wasn't sure what that was.
Yeah. So that was the student. He went through, did it by himself, and then he checked with his notes and tried to check if he got it right. Yep, got it exactly. And then he, compared his quiz with a friend and got it right. And then with the key. Yep.
Perfect. I'd never seen the tiers before in that way. Like I go through those stages, but I haven't thought of a conception of how to make it more visible to the kids and that they are transitioning from like individual, other than the fact that like when it's individual, it's silent in the class. So like it gets really loud when they're asking for help. So that I definitely appreciate that transition, and then just building in that like simple, straightforward reflection at the end, and managing that and encouraging that, as opposed to it being chat with your neighbor, like what worked, what didn't, and having more of the informal reflection, because they don't hold on to that, right? Then there's no record of that reflection that they have, it's gone.
Thanks. Yeah, and the idea is, I honestly, because I just sort of, switched, updated to better versions this year, but in future, I would really trying to hammer home that this is also like to help them, because typically they've got 2 or 3 days then from this until the test happens. So help them, okay, this is also you coming up with a good plan, right? So, you're good with all the skills, but you really still struggle with the extending or the word problem or the problems or whatnot. So like, allowing this to be, okay, I'm going to pick which review questions I'm going to do and just do those questions, so that it's, because otherwise, like even my A students will a full review assignment and then just kind of like give up or get bored with the hard questions, yet the hard questions are what they need to do. So yeah, thanks. And I'm just gonna see if I can try and pop one of my quizzes into the chat real quick.
I really like the way you've organized your page too, how you have you're developing questions on one side, but my question for you is, what's the difference? What would be emerging? I teach elementary school, so emerging is like they're not even on the page. And then extending, what's the difference between your proficient and extending on your quiz? How do they define which questions are proficient and which extend?
That's a good question. Let me just pop this in the chat and then I'll.
I ask because I'm personally struggling with that too, because I've gone from a 4
Yeah,
a 4-column rubric to a 3-column rubric.
yeah,
And I think it's just the emerging doesn't even make it on. Like they
yeah,
just, they're
yeah,
just understanding limited basic.
yeah.
Curious to
Yeah.
hear what your thoughts are.
Oh man, so I don't have an answer. So I've tried so many. Like when I did it with Peter, like this was the first time I ever tried standards-based grading, and I just did 3 levels, and that was before the sort of emerging developing thing had even come out. So I just did 3 levels, but it was okay because the learning outcomes were so specific. So it was just like needs improvement, partial mastery, and mastery. But like last year I did the same thing. Emerging was like they're not there yet, and then so same as you. And then this year I'm trying, because I just feel like my learning outcomes are so broad right now, that I've been doing the 4 levels just so that I can get some really like beginning. But the thing is that sometimes it's a judgment call. So I've just, like, if you look at the tiered practice quiz I have, I've just got questions like emerging, developing in that column, and they will tend to get harder as you go. So I just have the kids like try all those questions, and then I look at their work as a whole and think, okay, they got the easiest questions right, they're emerging. They did all the questions, but because I feel like it's just, it's a judgment, because sometimes they've done all the questions, but then there's like some of the development questions they could get, and some of the emerging questions they couldn't get. So then it's like, it's so hard. It's like this judgment thing. So I just put them all in one column and then look overall at it. So yeah, and then the same proficient extending, like they're just in one column and then I'm just kind of looking at them. So I don't have a hard and fast rule at this point, like this one's emerging, this one's developing, but they tend to sort of just go from like easier to harder. Yeah.
Thank you. No, I appreciate the input. Thank you.
Yeah. What grade do you teach?
I teach grade 6, 7.
6, 7. Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
Elysia, another question I had for you was in terms of learning outcomes, when I'm leaning to like more, or like, sorry, like fewer rather, bigger ones, because I find like some of the questions then meet like 2 or 3 learning outcomes, or they have parts of each. And so I have thought about like making more learning outcomes and subdividing them, but then you have a complex question that is involving all of them. And so I get caught. I don't know if there's a perfect strategy, but that's where I'm leaning in. Why? Because I get muddled and I'm like, I don't know where to put this. Whereas if I make them a bit bigger, then, or I put them in both, like on my curriculum map that I make, it's like I put that practice question in 3. So that's kind of that piece that I am still playing with.
Yep. Yeah, no, absolutely. I like Peter's whole shtick is like, when you're making, I remember he told me this during my thesis, and I think he's written it in his book, like when you're making the test, you know, you say, okay, I want one of these and I want one of these. Well, then what are those, right? But totally, like sometimes how I've gotten around that, I don't remember exactly how I got around that with my thesis, because those learning outcomes, like for my grade 10, were very specific. Like I was having like 9 or 10 per unit. So yeah, I mean, sometimes how I'd get around that is like have a learning outcome that's like the end is like solve problems, where like that can have questions that like have the learning outcomes like combined, or like, you know what I mean, questions that, but yeah, I don't know, like that, it's tricky. I don't have a good answer for you, but I don't know, there's some middle compromise. I don't know.
Thank you.
Yeah.
This doesn't necessarily answer this question, but I know what I want to hang on to, and that is that I don't want the forest to be lost for the trees. So there are some really essential understandings, that there are connections between these little things, there are developments between those, and I don't want that to be lost in the minutiae of saying, can you do this? Can you do this? Can you do this? Where what I really care about is, can you do this? And so that's why I kind of err towards the fewer. But I also find that if I try to think about, what do the different levels look like from emerging to extending, that's where some of those differences can appear. So if I'm looking at adding and subtracting fractions, maybe I can put those into one, and then consider that, maybe there are some, maybe subtraction doesn't show up in the emerging level, but it does later on. And like some of those distinctions can show up across proficiencies instead of across standards. But that really, it comes with a bit of trial and error of, what standards really do distinguish themselves, that I can look at, that I need different pieces of evidence for that, versus what can I look at through single pieces of evidence. And so there's a bit of a balancing act there. But and maybe there are other ways to get at that really big picture, some more where you have your targeted kind of questions, and then some overall reflective kind of thing where you really want to try to draw out the bigger picture. So again, not really an answer, just some of what I want to hang on to as whatever process they're going through.
Mark, can I piggyback on that and ask a question?
By all means.
Would that be where, like group testing, where you can use your notes to actually just apply the understanding, where you can actually, that's, what we were discussing in our group a little bit, is when you use your notes towards just demonstrating learning, opposed to, I can produce this on my own, but can we functionally use it to find a larger piece? Is that what you're talking about, like bigger picture?
So I guess I'm not sure, like, to me, the use of notes might be a vehicle through which to do that, although I hope they can do that even apart from the using of notes. I mean, ultimately, in terms of what I hope they develop through learning through that unit and so on. But I'm thinking about like take a top. So you teach grade 7, right? So just to pick a topic there, like the relationship between fractions and decimals. And so there are a number of very specific things that they can learn to do, like how to convert a proper fraction to a decimal, how to convert a mixed number to a decimal, how to convert a decimal with a terminating decimal to a fraction. And there's all these little bits. But to me, the bigger important idea is that there are equivalent representations of fractions and decimals, and it's all about part to whole relationships. And so those are the ideas that I want them to come out with, that, and not just I can do this little routine and that little routine and that little routine. So it's more about that. So I think if I were trying to list some standards there, I'd probably not want to distinguish between all of those different little things, and instead just look at, all right, we're relating decimals and fractions. Now, how can I describe what that might look like over some kind of progression? And ultimately, what Elysia is doing here is helping the students understand that, and that's hard, but that's what we're aiming for here, I think.
I found, Mark, that when I'm doing my work with kids that haven't done it before, I have to combine those two things. I have to do the bigger picture thing, and I also have to give them an opportunity to look at what do I know on a smaller scale, because then that they understand, especially when I've got grade 8s and 9s, and they feel like they can move forward from there, and then constantly, like you say, drawing it back to how does it impact the bigger question, the big idea that we're working with, and then evaluating them on that. And I don't know, somehow maybe see little details of, like, maybe you're evaluating on a small scale to help them understand what they do and don't know. And then as far as your summative assessment goes, you're not writing down, can they like multiply fractions? that's where you're saying this is where they understand these bigger concepts, perhaps. There's always like the figuring out part, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think some good rich prompts at the end can do that. Like I know for myself as a math learner, I was really good at the trees. I could identify all different kinds of trees. I knew the trees, the leaves, the branches, the bugs under the leaves, and I didn't even know that there was a forest there. And yet if somebody had just pushed me to look for the forest, like look how these pieces come together so beautifully, then maybe I would have had a much richer math learning experience growing up. But you're right, like it's not like we can't ignore the trees either. So yeah, this is a really rich
I'm
question.
finding with like I really appreciate what was said, because like on the quiz, I'm seeing a student like this just jumps out at me. So I'm seeing a student that let's just think about the multiplying and dividing. She did all the multiplying proper fractions correctly. And dividing, but doesn't know how to multiply mixed fractions. And to me, I thought that's going to be obvious. She's going to look at that and see, you know, that's the different color. Okay, I need to work on multiplying just mixed fractions. You know, that's so obvious to me, but yet the students, somehow it wasn't obvious. They're not noticing that, and they're not going to their textbook and choosing questions. Like they're just doing all the multiplying questions and getting frustrated, you know, or just feeling done before they even get to the harder mixed numbers. And so not practicing the thing that they need to practice, right? Like, so I struggle with it, because like with the broad, I agree, the bigger picture, but then I find the students are needing more help with the details to see, you know, what they sort of need to work on. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
So yeah, I don't know.
Okay, anything else anybody wants to talk about, either about these things that we're wrestling with Elysia, or anything else about assessment? I should mention that our next session is May 5th. I'll type this into the chat. I'm just looking at some Peter's notes here. It'll be May 5th. And the people who are presenting, I don't know their last names, but there are a couple of people that Peter knows, and their names are, oh, is that you?
Yes, I believe I'll be one of those.
Awesome.
Myself and Steffi Van Den.
Okay, did you want to talk just a little bit about what you're going to be talking about? Because I have the notes here, you know, rubrics for changing. Let me just paste it in. Here we go. Rubrics for changing students' proficiencies and behaviors. So that's what I have it listed as. You can do whatever you want, of course, but did you want to give a quick plug for what you'll be doing?
That's basically it. How do we change, going back to Alicia's, how do we make kids care about what they're learning about, and how do we get them to recognize what they're learning, is basically what we've been experimenting with, and we'll share. And I appreciate being able to watch yours, because that way I have a foundation for demonstrating what our journey has been like, and we're still learning.
Great.
That is great. Thank you. And do we pronounce that Raya? Raya, okay. All right, any other comments, questions? If you know some colleagues that you think would like to be part of these conversations, people can join at any time. Going to the BCAMT website, and there's a link there there's a post, almost like a blog post about the assessment series, and a link to join. It'd be great to see numbers like this again, and the rich conversations keep going. I take it Peter never made it back yet. He was hoping to come in before the end, but
I'm right here.
oh, there you are. All right, awesome. Did you hear these discussions?
I've been listening for the last 20 minutes or so.
Cool. Any closing thoughts for us? I hope your dental stuff went all right.
Or it was exciting. So, you know, my only closing thought would be, I think I only listened to this conversation about the forest and the trees that was coming through. And I think some of the provinces are trying to move in that direction. So Ontario, for example, in their assessment criteria, they don't use language like emerging, developing, proficient, and extending. They have a 4-column system, but for them, it's knowledge, application, thinking, and communication. So knowledge are sort of the trees. Application is what Raya was referring to earlier. Can I take the trees and can I apply them? And then thinking is more the deep concepts and connections between concepts. And communication is sort of aside and is a different competency altogether. The new Alberta curriculum, which I was looking at last week, is moving in this direction as well. And I can't quite recall what it is that they're doing, but it seems like some provinces are trying to capture this idea of there is a minutia and there is a big ideas in the assessment. The problem is that a lot of these provinces are seeing these columns, as distinct fields when really they're nested, right? Like you need applications, needs knowledge, and thinking needs application and knowledge, and so on. So there's a nesting nature, which is very similar to what you were talking about, Mark, in your talk that you gave last month. So I think that some of the provinces are trying to get there. I think it's possible, looking at it the way you had presented to us, Mark, to see these as nested, and then we start to see the big picture and the connections. But and I urge everybody to view that. So that's my only final remarks. I wish I would have seen what you were presenting, Elysia. But good to see you.
It was recorded, so you can watch it after the fact.
And we'll see everybody in a month.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you again, Elysia. That was great. And yeah, we look forward to seeing you all next month.